Our first speaker is Sam Fong. Sam is a lead technology architect at Microsoft. Sam leverages his cloud-based expertise and a deep understanding of the complex regulatory compliance and security landscape to deliver transformational solutions for enterprise organizations across Canada. Today's topic, Sam will focus on building the insider risk management program using some modern technologies like UEBA, User and Entity Behavior Analytics.
Thanks, Brian, for that introduction. It certainly is good to be back in front of this audience, to be part of this community, and to be talking about this topic today, talking about it as well as learning from it and learning about it. I'm going to talk a little bit about one particular application of UEBA around building that insider risk management program. I'm going to be sharing with you some of our lived experience in trying to solve this problem for a 200,000 user organization that is Microsoft, globally, Microsoft Corporation. I'm going to start off with, what is UEBA, right? For those of you who are less familiar with it, I'm not going to read through Gartner's definition that you see on the slide. Rather, I'm going to summarize it by saying it's a category of solutions that aim to solve multiple distinct use cases using advanced analytics, right? And we do that by collecting large volumes of data and then looking at that data set for patterns of risk using deep learning. This idea came and it was originally labeled as user behavior analytics, right? It first came out of marketing within the retail vertical as a way for retailers to really understand and predict consumer buying patterns, right? But of course, people quickly realized, hey, there's other applications of this technology for these machine learning algorithm models that we can apply to other problems. And that's where in 2014, Gartner created the standalone category or market for what was at the time called UBA, User Behavior Analytics, and then later in 2015 updated that to being UEBA as we know of it today, right? User Entity Behavior Analytics. And that during that time was, when they realized, hey, we needed a little bit more than just the user activities. We need more context. We want to, enrich that data set that we're looking at to help us identify patterns. And so we needed to introduce other entities such as endpoint and network. Now, this market has grown exponentially, I would say, since 2015, growing from what was a $50 million, addressable market to what is now a $352 million addressable market in 2020, and it continues to grow, right? There are projections that predict that it's going to reach upwards of 1.2 billion by 2027, and so that you can see that market is becoming very crowded, while at the same time going through consolidation, which is kind of interesting, kind of in that point in time where we are at within this UEBA marketplace. Now, what's interesting is not all UEBA solutions are the same, right? It's, I have to remind myself often that this is a category of solutions. It's not a type of solution. There are 3 dimensions that define a solution as being part of this category. And depending on the requirements of your organization, the first part you're going to hear about is what use cases is it looking to address, right? And based on that, it's going to take you down a different path or different type of kind of UEBA solution your organization may look at. As an example, within Microsoft ourselves, as well as within our technology stack, we have multiple UEBA solutions, some that look at use cases for identity security, others that look at endpoint security, and then some that do cloud app usage. But I would say most of the common and top of mind use cases that you're going to find within this category are looking at doing detection for malicious insiders, compromised users, APT or advanced persistent threats, as well as zero-day attacks. And then certainly known threats, right? Things that are more, traditional or signature based. The other dimension for UEBA solutions around the advanced analytics, right? At the very most rudimentary level, it's looking at some kind of a rule-based or signature-based system for pattern matching, right? Making sense of that large volume of data that we get from a variety of different sources. And that, rule-based or signature-based, many of us are probably familiar with, right, from known threats. But doing that alone isn't enough to be considered a UEB solution, right? We have to combine it with some form of statistical modeling for creating baselining. More and more, you will see and hear of vendors introducing artificial intelligence to help us make sense of all that data and to kind of sift through all that noise through the use of different AI models, right? So we got things like unsupervised machine learning, supervised machine learning. Often they will come with some kind of risk scoring model to help us aggregate the individual risky behaviors in a way that assists with incident response and triage and management. The third dimension, and equally important, is around data, the set of data signals that these solutions will look at and apply their model to. And this is actually a very important dimension around for UEB solutions, because both the quality and the richness of that data set is what gives life to the solution. It's what helps us solve for this problem. And many of these problems are often very difficult to do, and that's why we're applying AI machine learning to it. But within data, there are the typical ones you expect, such as bringing in data from our events, from our event activities, from our logs, but also looking at how we enrich the quality of that data from other unstructured sources like HR systems, applying user context, bringing in real-time business context into that, as well as looking at external threat sources, right? Other threat feeds that may align with the requirements for the problem that we're trying to solve for, physical security systems like badging systems and video surveillance to give us awareness of access patterns and shift rotations. What's also interesting is as this market develops and grows, more and more we're seeing UEBA as a terminology come up as a feature in a lot of adjacent segments, such as IAM, SIEM solutions, CASBs, and EDR solutions as well. And what that's doing is driving more of a focus for the, I would say, traditional UEBA solution providers to look at core use cases. One of those use cases has been particularly interesting for us at Microsoft. And that one is around looking at malicious insiders or inadvertent exfiltration of data. Now, we started on this journey several years ago when our Microsoft IT team and security team sat down with our CISO, Brett Arsenal, in a routine planning meeting, right? They asked him what was keeping him up at night. What was surprising to everyone, I think, is that he didn't call out an external threat such as cyber criminals or nation state attacks. What he said to them instead is he's actually really concerned about employees, people like myself, our engineers, our executives, our back office employees, because he said we're all given access, right? We give them all, each a blue badge and access to different systems, to different data repository, and we trust them. We trust them to do what's right, but sometimes mistakes are made, and those mistakes can be costly. They can have broader impacts to the organization. And so his feeling was actually that, external threats are more easily scoped, right? With many defined solutions to detect and respond to them through, our zero trust and defense in depth strategy. Some of those you'll see in the upper portion of the slide. But with insider risk management, he said it carries the same risks with exfiltration, with the potential for harm, except the actors are already on the inside. They actually have to work less to get access to these systems than the external threats because they're already here and they know where to go. And it's really hard for us to tell what is normal behavior, right? Is it normal for that individual? Is it normal for that role? What about the team, the organization? And then even looking at industries, right? What's normal for financial institutions could be very different, as we're learning through some of this, than a healthcare provider. And oftentimes it says, hey, team, go look at this and help us find a solution, but look at it with good intent, right? Because rather than saying, hey, everyone's going to be malicious, all the employees are being bad, he also sees that a lot of times these are mistakes. The intention may be different from the outcome. And then, at the same time, there may be instances where we do have to look at it and say, okay, there is something potentially bad going on in here. So what we found when we started looking at this for Brad, and by we, I mean, the team that was working on this at the time, we found a market that had a very fractured approach looking at different use cases that didn't really fit what we needed to address insider risk or insider threat management. And we had a lot of conversations with different customers, many of which became design partners with us as we worked to solve this problem along with other universities that were a part of this. And many of them, as well, when we looked at this, would capture signals using a user activity monitoring solution, take those results, pipe it into or send it into a separate UEBA solution, with the hopes of trying to find that insider risk. And through those algorithms, really it was more like looking for a needle in a haystack. And what we learned were a couple of things, right? It wasn't as easy as we thought. There wasn't really anything that we could just set it and forget it. Often the output, there was a lot of noise in it. And then for us to kind of make sense of it, it extended our deployment time, right? For us to look at the data, normalize it, feed it back in the model, fine tune it. And with some solutions that required an agent, that management piece introduced a scale and performance issue for us, particularly like in this hybrid remote work style setting that we're all living through throughout and during the pandemic. Now, for us at Microsoft, we started this hybrid remote work style way before the pandemic. So, any of the agent-based approaches added that level of complexity for us. Let's take a look at the models too, right? So with some of the models, they were just simply too opaque, right? We didn't really understand why we got the results that we did, what it meant. We didn't know how to sit through that noise. Explainability was a huge issue. It was really difficult to try to explain to, not even just someone non-technical, but even for some of our technical folks who were not data scientists, who were not, applied researchers. What does it all mean? What do we do with this data? And then on the other end of the spectrum, we would run into models and then see models that were too flexible, right? There was a lot of fine tuning that you needed to do upfront in order to get any results. And that's where you run into requirements for specialized skill sets like data scientists and applied researchers, which we now have on the team, right? But not every organization has those resources and those awesome people. And there's really, quite frankly, not enough of them to go around. So we can't even hire enough of these people, right? And so coming out of this, we realized, hey, a lot of these solutions, they're not bad solutions, they're great solutions. They were targeting the use cases that were different than what we need, right? Rather than looking at the user and the user risk, they were looking at the data, they were they were looking at individual transactions, they were doing enforcement actions at that point in time, whereas we needed something that would allow us to create and curate that a risk scoring profile, look at potentially insider risky behavior, and have an ability to be able to look back and view some of those leading indicators on risk. So there are three things that we learned throughout this experience of working on our own insider risk management program. And there's probably more, but I think there's three major ones that I want to call on, touch on today. The first one is that this is really a game about signals, right? It's a very difficult noise reduction problem to solve for because you've got a combination of technology and all the activities and events and logs, but you also have the people and people's feelings and trying to understand what they're trying to do, what they want to do. And so with insider risk management in particular, we needed that pivot to be based around the user, right? Not a particular transaction or a single log event. We need to do correlation of those signals with risk scoring in mind that can then explain to a team of non-data scientists why this particular alert or why particular this incident, this pattern that we're seeing is important or maybe even relevant and compelling. And adding to that, right? And that's where the quality of those signals become really, really key. Being able to tie in unstructured systems like our HR system, right? Is this person, experiencing poor performance? Do we have somebody who didn't get the promotion they were looking for? Do we have someone who's resigning to go somewhere else? Along with sentiment analysis via like email and different chat platforms, right? Do we have someone who's potentially disgruntled or disillusioned, right? That may be a potential indicator for personal disposition to cause harm. And then there's the data context element piece of it, right? Losing or exfiltrating one confidential or secret document carries a much higher set of consequences than somebody who accidentally walked off with 5,000 general documents that's part of the public domain already because they forgot to turn in a hard drive, right? So a lot of these signals is what allows us to create that baseline profile, allow us to look at peer grouping, in some cases even looking at doing priority, identifying priority assets where we may have to apply the models differently because these are execs or people who work in research and have additional access and behavioral patterns different from the rest of the organization. The second thing we learn is that it's not just an IT or security problem. Okay? Having the model is great, or having our data science build all of that and identify the patterns are great. But then we also quickly realize, hey, once we got something that was potentially compelling, it's like, what do you do with that? Where do you go? And if you're like many of our clients, and as well as ourselves at the time, a lot of this done was done in an ad hoc fashion, right? You go out and say, okay, who needs to know? Typically, HR is involved, legal is involved, as key stakeholders, and those are the non-technical folks are a part of this team, right? We have to somehow be able to communicate, and there are other concerns that come up now. There are non-technical in nature, things like dealing with privacy, right? Who needs to know? How do you keep this under wraps? Because this could have far-carrying implications. How do you manage the culture of this? Because you want to make sure that this is seen as something that's helpful to the organization, providing guardrails to the user. It's not something that's going to be seen as too big brotherish. And then from a privacy perspective, even as the team is working on this for all of the risk managers, how do you remove that bias, that unconscious bias that can happen? I don't want to, right? I don't want to know if this is somebody I'm working with or potentially become a colleague or a future director that may affect my career path. Right? So that human element we see as something that's always going to be required in that response. Unlike other UEBA solutions, looking at different use cases, maybe something more traditional external threat setting where it's like, hey, we see a pattern, we see something, here's a playbook, we're going to call it, we're going to respond and shut it down. Right? With this, it's like we look at it, we still need that human element to make that final decision of how do we handle this, where does it need to go, is this real? Um, and in many cases, many parts of the world, it's where legal gets involved as well, and HR is looking at compliance with local labor laws and regulations, and they're going, hey, how is this dealt with in this part of the world versus another region? And then the third thing we learn throughout this process is the set of use cases, right? Don't always, as you're looking at different solutions, as you're thinking about implementing this program yourself, there's also all the nice bells and whistles, and but don't go for the cool use cases. Go for what you need for your organization. Right? Ask yourself, what does insider threat mean to your organization? What does it look like? We asked ourselves what those risks are that we care about, and out of that, we came up with about 20 risk cases. And on the left of the slide, you'll see that where we honed in and said, okay, here are the subset of those 20 that we really care about, are top of mind. And then from there, we even narrowed it down further and started with what you see on the right and say, okay, these are the ones we want to start small, have a narrow set of defined use cases so we can prove them out, show value, and show where we're getting results, and starting with a limited set of data as well. But with the option to further enrich that set of signals if and when we're ready for it. And that is just so that we remove or reduce the amount of noise that we have to sift through before we can start seeing some results to work with. Right? So so what did we do in the end, right? I'm sure you probably already know. In the end, we ended up building our own solution. It started as a solution that we're building for ourselves within our own use, and then we turned it into a product and have been sharing with many customers. A lot of them were early design partners, early adopters of this. So the next set of slides you're going to see are not following the typical workflow of what an insider management risk manager would look like or go through as a workflow, but rather centered around the top requirements that we were thinking about as we were building the solution, as we were working to solve this problem for ourselves. The first one is privacy, right? Top and first and foremost is around how do we address privacy? So you'll see, we really needed that ability to remove that bias, right? Be able to anonymize the data we're seeing down to the alerts. And as we're working through the alerts as a team, be able to make those decisions based solely on the facts, on the data, on the signals that we're seeing, rather than anything to do with the individual. The other element around is around collaboration, secure collaboration and explainability, right? So that concept of the risk scoring, how are we able to show the team of risk managers who are working through this, who is comprised of both technical and non-technical resources. How we arrived at this, right? What did the user do in plain, normal, regular language of that got us to this point, to this particular risk score, and then provide them with a platform to securely collaborate and communicate in that. So we're not going, hey, let's send off an email. Now we're going to worry about who's going to get their hands on that email, and things will leak out. And so we, in this case, partner with our Teams friends over at the Teams platform to provide a secure environment for them to go in. Anyone who's part of that case, who's given permission to that case, would then be able to communicate in a central location that's secure, but also share information so that we have that one version of truth. Another area and a big top requirement was just being able to focus on a tight set of template use cases, right? Or machine learning models, because we really wanted that shortened time to value, right? Through our own experience, if we had to sit there and turn a bunch of dials and switches and fine tune a model before we got any results, it would just take too long. So we wanted something that was easy to start with. We're talking about days and months, not months and years, in order to get some viable output. With the ability to say, hey, if we have additional investments, other signals that we can feed into this to enrich the data and the context, that we can do that. And what we want to address here is just removing that need for lengthy configuration of that fine-tuning period, or needing to hire and find specialized skill sets like data scientists or applied researchers to be able to work on these models with us. Now, this part wasn't part of the solution when we first built it, because at the time we knew and had gone through and hired those data scientists and applied researchers to join the team to understand, okay, what are the use cases we were the most important to us, where do we start? But we heard from a lot of our design partners and early adopters, early customers, that hey, some of them don't have those skill sets, they don't have the data, they don't know where to really start. And so we came out with this idea of prepackaged analytics that they can opt into, and this benefits, now caveat here is, right, this benefits customers who are already on the M365 platform for the Microsoft Cloud, because by opting in, we'll tap in, and the solution will start looking at that and making recommendations around, hey, these are probably the top 2 or 3 use cases you want to start off with, because you may have some potential risk, right? Finally, and the final area here is around looking at the set of signals, right? The thing about the set of alerts. How do we help remove or reduce the amount of alert fatigue that everyone's getting these days, and the multiple portals we got to get into? And that's where looking at the quality of the data, that notion of how do we bring more context to it? How do we bring enrichment? So that as these things are called out, we can explain how we got there and what fed into the model, right? So including things like our HR systems, right? As well as our other solutions from the security platform around cloud app usage. We also can look at cloud app access for bringing that context into this model. And then as well as the data context, right? Do we have something that is potentially sensitive to the organization and matches a certain information type, or has been labeled as being, highly confidential? And then, looking forward, we're adding even more advanced models, right? Things like what we call cumulative data exfiltration, right? As where it's looking at multiple dimensions to help us understand if something bad is going on. And what that one is particularly interesting, and without going into too much detail, is one where a lot of people may refer to as that slow drip, right? Where instead of having too much noise, where there are lots of things are being downloaded and exfiltrated and being accessed in different ways, there's an absence of noise. I like the stock market analogy of, when you look at 2 stocks and they both have flat lines, how do you know which one is a good investment? Which one do you buy? Like how far back do you look? How far back can you look to make that determination? So that's a quick look at what we've done. Kind of looking forward as well. What can we do? Like, what do we see? And this is both going beyond just the Microsoft set of solutions. As we think about the solutions that are out there, how can we partner better together? What are the things that we're looking at, as well as partnership with different researchers and universities. It's things like now that we have some of the key models around identifying these risks and these patterns, What about the people who are working on this, right? Who's watching the watchers? Um, we talk about some of the models being too opaque, or some of them being too open and being difficult to work with without, specialized skill sets. Now, how can we kind of find a happy medium by introducing things like policy customization so that organizations can cater more for their vertical or for their particular set of use cases? Today that loop does need to come back to us, and then we push an update to the service. Another area is around third-party integration, right? That's being a game of signals. How can we introduce and add more connectors and better integration from our friends all across security and across the space to be able to, leverage each other's learning and each other's, threat feeds to do more together. And then kind of longer term is taking a look at some of those AI modeling, right? How can we, do better deep learning? How do we introduce reinforced or semi-supervised learning? Some of this I think we'll talk about perhaps in the panel discussion. So I'll just kind of, leave it at that. And on that, I'm going to finish off here with a pointer to a case study. I'm not going to go into the detail of it. Certainly, you've heard me talk quite a bit about our experience at Microsoft, what led us to creating the solution, some of the things we went through in trying to solve this problem for ourselves. But Avanade is another great example. They were a early design partner with us, and they have also adopted the solution to support their insider threat management program as well. So with that, let me turn it over to Brian. Thank you for the time, and I look forward to later on in the panel discussion.